السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم تسليمًا كثيرًا كثيرًا. أما بعد. We are continuing from our last discussion, which was primarily around verses 172 and 173. More detail about ayah 173, which talks about some of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made haram. These elements that are mentioned are not an exhaustive list, it's not a complete list. Rather, it is simply to clarify that there were some things that the people of that time, the Arabs of Jahiliyyah, held to be lawful, which are in fact unlawful. And in other places in the Quran, further details are given about halal and haram. So after a general overview and some detail of this verse, I thought it might be beneficial to go into some further detail, because there are many commandments that are extracted from just this one verse. And these commandments pertain to us on a daily basis. So I've already told you what the words mean, and a brief explanation of al-mayta, ad-dam, lahm al-khinzir, ma uhilla bihi li ghayrillah, and the hukm of ittirar, where there is ittirar, meaning dire necessity, then what to do in that case. We have spoken about the verse in that context directly from the words. However, there are many modern applications of these same words, and it's important for us to understand the application in order for us to understand how to implement this verse in our lives. So, Mayta was clarified as any animal that has flowing blood, which is slaughtered, which is killed in a manner contrary to the way Sharia has prescribed. Animal has to be halal in order for us to consume it. That's understood. But if the animal itself was halal, for example, cows, goats, chicken, if the animal itself is halal but it was not slaughtered in the halal way, and what is the halal way? The simple method is that it needs to be slaughtered in the name of Allah. And slaughtering denotes the slitting of the throat, the severing of various vessels. So the two jugular veins and the windpipe and the food pipe. I'm using very simple terms so that everyone can understand. Okay? So when all four of these are severed, then the animal is halal according to everyone. According to some scholars, if only three are slaughtered, it is sufficient. But aside from this slaughtering method, the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must also be taken. If the animal is slaughtered by a Muslim and he, for some reason, forgets, he has the intention to take the name of Allah, but let's say the animal was struggling and he was struggling to hold the animal, secure the animal, and in the heat of the moment he saw a second where he could pass the knife, he passed the knife, forgot to say, the animal is still halal. Because the tasmiyah, the name of Allah, is in the heart of every Muslim, and he had every intention to do so. Yes, if he deliberately does not take the name of Allah, having the chance, having the opportunity on purpose, says, no, I'm not going to take the name of Allah, then that animal is not halal, it is mayta. Why? Because it was never his intention to take the name of Allah. Taking the name of Allah also applies to the Ahlul Kitab that are slaughtering their meat. Okay? وَطَعَامُ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ حِلٌّ لَكُمْ. The Quran says that the food of Ahlul Kitab is halal for you, and food here is referring to meat. However, in another place in the Quran, it says very clearly, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا مِمَّا لَمْ يُذْكَرِ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ وَإِنَّهُ لَفِسْقٌ. You must not eat from those animals upon which the name of Allah has not been taken, and verily it is an open sin. So some people take the first ayah, oh no, it's food of Ahlul Kitab, let's go eat it. And there's two problems there. Two major problems, people tend to completely ignore them. The first problem is that did the person who slaughtered it, did they identify themselves as one of the Ahlul Kitab? Now people make generalizations. This is why it is important to understand the situation of the country that a person is giving a verdict about. People took fatwas from scholars of overseas. They said, oh, we live in a Christian country, so can we eat their food? So the assumption made by those scholars that, oh, if there's Christians that are slaughtering it, yeah, their zabiha must be halal. No, we are not living in a Christian country. People who live here will understand that very quickly, that a very large population does not identify themselves as Christian. In fact, there is an overwhelmingly increasing population that does not subscribe to any religion. So that's one thing. If they identify themselves, so that means people would just go to the marketplace, oh yeah, this is food from Ahlul Kitab, just go and buy it. It's cheaper than the guy selling halal meat down the store. They're just ripping us off. No. Was it slaughtered by the actual person who slaughtered it? First of all, was it slaughtered? Was it slaughtered or was it just shot? If the slaughterer was from the Ahlul Kitab, did they take the name of Allah or not? It's a condition for them as well. If it's a condition for us, how could it not be a condition for them? When the Quran is saying very clearly, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا مِمَّا لَمْ يُذْكَرِ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ. Allah knows that every Muslim is going to slaughter in the name of Allah. Who is this verse referring to? Those people who are not from your tradition, their food is halal for you, but make sure they're also taking the name of Allah when they're slaughtering their animals. Now that could be in any language. It doesn't have to be in Arabic. They don't have to say Bismillah Allahu Akbar in those words. They could say it in English, they could say it in Hebrew, it doesn't matter. But they have to take the name of Allah. What kind of sense is that a Muslim is required to take the name of Allah, but if a non-Muslim does it, it's all good. It doesn't add up, logically speaking. And it's against this verse of the Quran, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا مِمَّا لَمْ يُذْكَرِ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ. This is why our ulama have not given the fatwa for, and I know this, some people will see this as a controversial issue. It's not a controversial issue. For us, because this is our field, it's not a controversial issue. Whatever appears to be more correct in light of proofs, well, it's our responsibility to clarify that for people. So I was saying, this is why our senior ulama have not given the fatwa of machine slaughtered chickens being halal. Why? The name of Allah is not being taken on that animal. Even if someone were to ignore the fact, you were to come up with this argument that, well, yeah, you press the button, so you cause the blades to move, and therefore, this argument is there. This argument is no longer it's no longer a fiqhi argument, like many of the arguments, like the mas'ala of moon sighting. It's no longer a fiqhi argument. These arguments are now discussed in light of industrial needs. This has now become an argument about industry, not about fiqh. No, we have all this demand, we got to meet this demand, how are you going to get people to slaughter? Well, there are countries in the world today showing that you can actually keep up that volume of production by having it hand slaughtered by actual people. It's more efficient, it's cheaper. It's much, much cheaper than having these massive factories set up. The cost of that equipment and maintaining it is actually much more than manpower. That's a side argument. But was the name of Allah taken on those birds? It wasn't. Who are you fooling? You got some factories with a tape playing. There's a tape playing. Subhanallah. The animal must be slaughtered by a human being. It must be slaughtered by a mukallaf. Somebody who is legally responsible. Legally responsible. So, the name of Allah was not taken. And it was not slaughtered by a person. Stay away from it. At best, it's doubtful. At best, it's doubtful. What did Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam tell us? دَعْ مَا يَرِيبُكْ إِلَى مَا لَا يَرِيبُكْ. Those things that put you into doubt, leave them for the things that don't leave you into doubt. Just leave them. So the argument is industrial. The argument is about what's cheaper. Okay? That does not affect whether it's halal or not halal. I mentioned to you that there are two types of substances that we consume. Those that are sourced from plants, generally speaking, and those that are sourced from animals. All things that are sourced from plants are halal unless something happens to them, something is mixed with them that makes them haram. And all things that are sourced from animals are haram until such thing happens that makes them halal. Okay? I'm talking about meat specifically. I'm not talking about eggs. I'm not talking about milk. Flesh. Yes, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave us two exceptions. Fish and locusts. If they die on their own, you can eat them, provided that the fish is not floating on top of the water, because that means it has now started decomposing. You don't touch it. If you find it dead, but it's still in the depths of the water, you can take it, you can eat it. It's halal. So, mayta. Understanding mayta. Now, an animal that is not slaughtered in line with the principles of deen, with the principles of Islam, as laid out in Quran, as laid out in the hadith of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, such an animal is categorized as mayta, carrion. It's just dead meat. To consume it is haram. To buy it, to sell it is also haram. And it is najis. It will be considered impure. Yes, if it's an animal that has hide or fur, once the fur is removed, the hide is removed and it's tanned, it becomes tahir. The hide of those, so you don't have to check, for that leather jacket, that was this slaughtered, was this slaughtered by a Muslim or not? No. The hide, once it's tanned through any means, it's pure. Similarly, according to many ulama, the bones of those animals are also halal. Why? Because the bone does not have blood vessels running through it in the way that flesh does. We know that bones do have a blood supply. We understand that. There are attachments of blood vessels to bones. However, it is not in the same way as flesh. There's very minimal blood. In fact, if you were to break a bone open, you would not see that type of bleeding. Therefore, according to some ulama, and the ahnaf are amongst them, the bones of the animal, once they've been washed and dried, they are tahir. Similarly, the hair of that animal is tahir. It can be used. Other ulama will not agree with that. But any other part of that animal coming from the flesh, this is impermissible. Question. What about rennet? What about rennet? What is rennet? Rennet is an enzyme that is extracted from the lining of a young calf's belly. So renin, what it does is it helps milk curdle. Curdle meaning it becomes hard, it coagulates, it turns into a solid mass. So it's an enzyme that does that, and it is therefore required for making cheese. In Arabic it's called infaha. So, is it halal, is it haram? There are two views on this. According to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah and Imam Malik rahimahullah, it is tahir and it can be used. Therefore, cheese that has rennet in it, according to Imam Abu Hanifa and according to Imam Malik, it is halal. According to Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah, and the two students of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, both, according to them it is najis and it cannot be used. So there is a difference of opinion amongst the ulama. So what do? The better thing, the safer thing is to avoid it. However, what happens is because of existing dietary restrictions, there are already many restrictions and many precautions that we take. And if you tell people to stop consuming cheese altogether, and so there is some kind of haraj in it, people won't die without eating cheese, but it's a greater limitation. That's why in Western countries, we say that there is room for it. If you avoid it, it's better. If you consume it, it is allowable. However, do not confuse rennet with pepsin. Pepsin is derived only from pork. It is derived from pigs. So pepsin also has a similar effect. So some cheeses, you see, the manufacturers, they look at what's available and what's cheaper. And that's why for a long time we used to have this problem where in many products it would say this and or. This and or. Why? Because they keep changing. Their supply keeps changing. It's not consistent. We'll put this or we'll put this. Now cheese says rennet and or pepsin. Great. What do? You can't touch it. Pepsin is absolutely haram. Then they came up with another alternative to rennet and pepsin, microbial enzymes. So these are plant-generated enzymes. So if it has that, generally speaking, it's halal. Okay? So this is related, this is all coming from this word meita. Is rennet considered meita or is it not? So Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah says no, it's not considered. There's no blood supply there, and even if the animal, obviously the question only arises if the animal was not slaughtered in a halal way. If the animal was slaughtered in a halal way, there's no question about it. So this was related to meita. I won't get into the details of hunting because there are masail that are related to hunting animals. When does it become halal? When does it not? There are verses in Surah Al-Ma'idah that go into that with a little bit more detail. Maybe at some other time we'll go into those injunctions, but there is enough to cover just from this verse here. Fat. The fat of such animals. So the fat of such animals will also be najis. Generally speaking, it will be najis. It is haram for consumption. It is haram for consumption. Question. Most soap uses beef tallow. Most soap uses it. So what do you do about that soap? Is it considered najis? Is it not considered najis? Allama Ibn Abidin Ash-Shami, rahimahullah, has written some detail about it, and he says in the case of the tallow that's used in soap, it goes through a process called tabdilul mahiyya. Tabdilul mahiyya is where the actual molecular structure of the substance changes in an irreversible way so that it cannot be restored to its original shape. Therefore, he says, and there's pretty much an agreement across most ulama that it is permissible. And there was discussion even the time of Sahaba radiallahu anhum about using such fat, for example, to grease the bottoms of ships. Could it be used for that or not? They said it can be used. In fact, some Sahaba radiallahu anhum said that it could even be used on the skin if needed for some kind of a treatment. There are actual fatwa of Sahaba radiallahu anhum. However, it's better to avoid it in its original shape, in its original form. It should be avoided. It's used in cosmetics, they should be avoided. Cosmetics that has it, generally speaking, we should try to avoid it because it still falls under the category of meita. Blood. Blood, when we say blood is haram and blood is najis, blood is haram and najis according to the consensus of the Muslims. There is no difference of opinion in it, but remember that this applies to flowing blood. Flowing blood. So, if there's a bug, you squash a bug, and it's got some blood in it, it doesn't have that type of flowing blood. It's not like a warm-blooded animal that has a proper circulation of blood. So it's not going to be considered najis. One king, just remembered an anecdote, one king asked great alim of his time about the blood that comes from, small bugs. And he said, sometimes like mosquitoes, for example, you squash a mosquito, there's blood inside it. He said, is it najis? So the jurist said, you're asking me about the blood of a mosquito, but you're not asking me about the thousands of people whose blood you shed. What is the hukum of their blood? And you're asking me about the blood of a mosquito. Allahu Akbar. Anyways, but if that blood from those bugs is excessive, then it must be washed. You've slaughtered an animal. There's some blood now in the meat. That blood is no longer flowing blood. The flowing blood has been extracted from the carcass of that animal. If there's blood in it, it will not be considered najis. However, we should not consume that blood. But if such a blood gets on someone's clothing or so on and so forth, this is after it has been slaughtered, after all the blood has drained out of the body. Then there is still some in the meat somewhere when you open it. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. So it's nothing to panic about. Sometimes we eat meat and it's cooked a little rare. So, it could be steak, it could be chicken, you see all this blood inside it. It's nothing to freak out about. That's not that kind of najis blood that, oh my God, it touched my mouth and I have to go wash my mouth. There's nothing like that. So, consuming flowing blood is impermissible, right? To drink blood, impermissible. However, what about getting a blood transfusion? Giving blood and taking blood. If blood is an impure substance, then what is the hukum of that in the light of this verse? It says blood is haram. So, there are a few elements. I know it's a very technical discussion today, but these are masail. I'm giving you a glimpse. I think it's the first time we've gone into ahkam with this depth in this series. But this is very important. Any substance or part of the human body has a couple of aspects attached to it. The first aspect is just by virtue of it being a part of the human being, it is worthy of respect, it is sacred, it must be protected. It cannot be violated. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored the human being. Allah has honored the human being. So their body is off limits. The Prophet ﷺ said that إِنَّ دِمَاءَكُمْ وَأَمْوَالَكُمْ وَأَعْرَاضَكُمْ حَرَامٌ عَلَيْكُمْ كَحُرْمَةِ يَوْمِكُمْ هَذَا فِي شَهْرِكُمْ هَذَا فِي بَلَدِكُمْ هَذَا. Your blood, to shed someone's blood, to take someone's wealth or damage it, their property, or to damage someone's reputation, it's all haram. Just like this day is haram, it's sacred, and this month is sacred, and this place is sacred. It said this at Hajjat al-Wada'. So, to take someone's blood, generally speaking, it's haram. The other thing that we know about blood is that it's najis. So, now it raises a question about donating blood and taking blood. So, what the fuqaha have said is that by nature, blood is something that we can't touch. By its origin, it's something that we cannot touch, we cannot use. However, where there is a question of saving someone's life and not causing harm to another person's life, this could be now coming into that allowance that the Quran has given. فَمَنِ اضْطُرَّ غَيْرَ بَاغٍ وَلَا عَادٍ فَلَا إِثْمَ عَلَيْهِ. Person who is forced to. فَمَنِ اضْطُرَّ. A person who is forced to neither seeking the pleasure of it nor going beyond the limit of necessity, then there is no sin on them. There may be, this ayah may be providing a precedence for this or allowing some room for it, and there may be a precedent for this in Sharia. What is that precedent? Mother's milk. By virtue of the human being inviolable, sacred, protected, honored, mother's milk should also be impermissible. But as we know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala produces that for the sake of the baby. In fact, in many cases, it is obligatory on the mother to breastfeed her child. It's a substance produced by the human body, but it's a source of life. So there, in those cases where the child is unable to access any other nourishment, it becomes an obligation on the mother to feed that child. Similarly, possibly, if the blood can save someone's life and it is not causing any harm or any disrespect to the donor's body or to their life, then in that case there should be some allowance. And this is pretty much the consensus and the agreement of modern scholars. Okay? So, but this cannot be a trade, it cannot be a business, because the substance itself is najis and it's haram. It has a medicinal purpose. So it can be, so can you buy and sell blood? No, you cannot buy and sell blood. You can donate, it can be kept and stored and administered, infused into the bodies that need it, when they need it, in the case of dire necessity. Okay. Pork, the pig is an animal which is najisul ayn. The next item on the list is lahm khinzir. So it is najisul ayn, which means every part and portion of it, including its bones, will be considered najis. Dealing with it in any way is impermissible. Some fuqaha have allowed the use of its bristles as needles for stitching leather. If it can be avoided, it's better. But in some cases, they have allowed the use of its bristles. But possibly because it is in such a small quantity and its najasa will not spread, so you use it and you wash your hands. But to use the leather, to use pig skin, is not permissible. Doesn't matter if it's been tanned. And one thing to note for us is that there are many items that we use on a regular basis that have pig skin lining. Many high-end shoes, the inner part of the shoe, it's all pig skin. How do you detect pig skin? It has noticeable pores in it, small holes. It will usually be very soft, and that's why it's used. It's very, very soft and supple. It's very thin and flexible. So it's used, for the lining, inner lining of shoes. But remember, it's najis. It's used in golf clubs, for golfing gloves, very, very commonly, because they need that really, really soft, supple, flexible, almost like you're not wearing anything feel, but protecting the hands at the same time. So it's used in those things. So it's used in a lot of soft leather items, and it's used in accessories. It's also used in clothing like jackets. It's also used in purses. So these are things to be careful of. Just ask the source, is it cowhide? What is it? Is it lamb? It's good to find out, especially if you see that it has pores in it. That's the giveaway. That's what makes it stand out. If you see leather, it's just smooth, it's fine, ignore it. Now, where you see those pores, be aware. Now, we talked about the animals that are slaughtered, how they're slaughtered, so on and so forth, on the names of other people, to honor other people, or for the sake of getting close to other makhluk. So we don't need to go into those details. But let's talk a little bit more about treatments. The use of impermissible elements in medication and in treatment. So these are najis things. Dam, mayta, lahm al-khinzir. They're haram. Their consumption is haram in any quantity. But what if these elements are found in a medication that a person is thinking of taking? So the first thing that we will do in such circumstances, is we will look at what the alternatives are. Simple example, you are prescribed some capsules and the capsules are coated in gelatin. Okay? Now, the first question is, are you medically required to take that medicine or not? Has this been prescribed by an expert doctor, or are you self-diagnosing and self-prescribing? Ideally, it should be a Muslim doctor that says, yeah, you need to take that. But even if it's a non-Muslim doctor who is reliable and they're doing it based on fact, that yes, the medical data shows that 70%, 80% of this problem can be resolved by taking this medication. A majority of the time, in other words. So once you've reached that point where it's deemed as a medical necessity, and I'll talk a little bit more about medical necessity in just a bit. First thing to ask is there an alternative for this medication? Is there an alternative? Is it available in tablet form? Is it available in the form of an injection? In the form of there are many forms of taking a medication. Is there some other form? Is there some alternative? Is there another company that's manufacturing it? Let's say that there is a company that's manufacturing it, but it's not available where you live. Or it is so costly that it is impossible for you to sustain that cost for the duration of your treatment. Or there is a halal alternative available, but the formula is unsuitable for your health because it contains an element that will trigger off a certain medical condition that you have. In other words, it is not medically suitable for you. So in all of these cases, you can cross that out as an alternative. You can safely say that there's no alternative. In such a case, it may be permissible to take that medication as it is. The first thing is to ascertain medical necessity. What is medical necessity? Generally speaking, the word فَمَنِ اضْطُرَّ talks about darar, harm. If a person is put into a condition of harm. So, what is harm? Harm is a high probability of damage to one's life. Damage to one's life. Okay? So that means, generally speaking, such medication should only be taken in dire situations, where a person's life is at risk. If this disease, it's an actual disease, and if it is not treated, then the consequences will be very dangerous for this person. This is a situation of dire necessity. That is the original ruling, based on just what the verse is saying. Is there a precedent for using something haram or najis for treatment? Yes, there is. There was a tribe of people who came from Urayna, the Banu Urayna, the tribe of Banu Urayna. They came to Medina and they got very sick. Extremely sick. Their faces and their skin turned yellow. So it was some kind of a severe jaundice, but their bellies got inflamed and inflated to the point where it was unbearable. So something in the air of Medina was not suiting them. They could not survive and they became extremely ill. So the Prophet ﷺ had them shift outside of Medina to a place where the camels of sadaqah, the camels that were collected in zakat, they were kept there. And the Prophet ﷺ told them, use the milk of these camels and the urine of these camels to treat yourself. It's a Sahih hadith, it's in Bukhari. These people used that treatment, they got better, and they turned out to be such traitors that they killed the people who were guarding those camels. They killed all the shepherds, they stole all the camels, and they ran. And the Prophet ﷺ had them pursued, had them apprehended, and punished very, very severely. But that there is a precedent for using something najis. Now, according to most of the ulama, the urine is najis. Some Hanbali scholars, they say that the urine of camels is an exception based on this hadith. But the majority of the fuqaha say that urine, all types of urine is najis. Why? Because Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, "Istanzihu min al-bawl, fa inna ammata adhab al-qabri minhu." Stay away from urine because most of the punishment of the grave is from it. And the hadiths where Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam passed by two graves, and إِنَّهُمَا لَيُعَذَّبَانِ وَمَا يُعَذَّبَانِ فِي كَبِيرٍ. Verily they are being punished, but not for something that they could have avoided. Not for something that they couldn't have avoided. They could have avoided it easily. أَمَّا هَذَا فَكَانَ يَمْشِ بِالنَّمِيمَةِ. This one used to spread rumors. وَأَمَّا هَذَا فَكَانَ لَا يَتَنَزَّهُ مِنَ الْبَوْلِ. And this one would not abstain from urine. So these ahadith, the majority of the fuqaha use these hadiths, say urine, doesn't matter what urine it is najis. Okay? What amount is allowable on your clothes is a different discussion. So the urine of those animals, for example, that are eaten. So imagine people that are dealing with these animals and farming them and they're shepherds and all of that stuff. If they were to account for every single drop, life would be impossible for them. So it is considered najasa khafifa. That there is more allowance. It just means there's more allowance of it. If it covers a quarter of a part of your cloth, okay, then you can't pray. Otherwise, if it's a little bit, it is allowable. Khair. That hadith sets the precedent for what is tadawi bil muharram. To medicate or to treat medicinally with a substance that is not halal. Okay? Some fuqaha have been extremely strict on this. They say no, in no circumstance is it permissible to use such a medication. Why? Because the Sahih hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not put a cure in something that He has made haram. It's a powerful argument. He would not put a cure in something that He has made haram. But other fuqaha say that, look, there's a precedent here. There's a precedent here in this hadith that establishes that there should be some grounds for this. So now, we talked about dire conditions, life-threatening situation, no alternatives. What about lesser conditions? So, what some fuqaha have said is that if the condition is not life-threatening, but it will significantly compromise the quality of life of that person, the quality of life for that person, then also it can be used. Okay? But if it's something like, for example, the common cold, the common flu. Now for most people this is not going to be a life-threatening situation. And there are many alternatives available. So for such a thing we would not use this. Somebody has a headache. Okay, now there are many medications you can take for a headache. Some of them are in the form of gel caps and the gel caps are not halal. So now you're not going to take that for a headache because there are so many alternatives available. Unless, of course, a person has a severe reaction to the other alternatives, or they're just not feasible for them. Okay, yes, now they'll fall into this category. Vaccines. Let's talk about vaccines. What is the deal with the vaccines? Are they permissible? Are they not permissible? And for some people, this is not even a discussion. There's nothing to debate about. It's very clear. Yes, it's something that it saves you from a life-threatening situation. Take it, and that's it. Finished. But there are some arguments that say, wait a minute, it's not the treatment of an existing condition. It's a prevention of a possible condition. So you're not treating anything. A vaccine is not treating anything because you don't have anything. So you're perfectly healthy. and you're taking this. Now, of course, this will only arise in vaccines that have some substance that is of a questionable nature, or it has some element of impermissibility in it. Let me give you a couple of examples. There are some vaccines that are live attenuated or inactive or deactivated vaccines. These are produced from the cells of living beings such as humans or animals. So we just had a whole discussion about using anything from the human being. Is that permissible? Is it not permissible? Generally speaking, no, we can't use human substance. So while we would not condone the extraction of those cells, and these cells have been taken historically from the 70s and onwards, historically these cells have been taken from aborted fetuses or miscarriages and things like that. Now, a virus, these viruses for which the vaccine is being formulated, they only thrive in that type of environment, within those cells. So you need cells in order to create the cure, in order to create the vaccine. So the cells are taken, cultured, and processed, and they're kept for many, many, many years. And then they're purified, they're cleansed of the fragments, the original fragments. And by the time the culture reaches a certain phase, there is no trace of the original cells that's left. There's no trace whatsoever. Yes, there might be nanograms of traces, that's like a billionth of a gram in one dose of some human DNA. It might be, there's a possibility that it might be. So, what is the situation with those? Second thing is haram elements that are added to those vaccines for some reason or another. For example, for some vaccines, there is a porcine element, an element extracted from pork, from pigs, to stabilize the solution, to give it a certain type of shelf life, to make it survive transportation, to keep it stable. Sometimes there are extractions from human blood, distilled extractions from human blood that are added to that vaccine to stabilize it. So, what about those? When you put it all together, let's take this through step by step. Many fuqaha agree that when there is a life-threatening disease, an outbreak of a life-threatening disease, Hazrat Maulana Shafati Thani rahmatullahi alayhi has written about this in Imdad al-Fatawa as well. When there is something like a ta'un, there's a pandemic, there's a plague, it's life-threatening, it's widespread, can you treat as a preventative measure, because there's no cure once you have it. There's no cure for the plague. So these pandemics don't have a cure once you have it. There is a high risk of people dying. So examples of this in the past: smallpox, polio, and rubella. There have been severe outbreaks of this that have caused the death of hundreds of thousands of people, possibly millions of people have died because of this. So, what the vaccines have done is, in some cases, they have helped the humans in completely eradicating that disease from the face of the earth. In some cases, from an entire continent or most continents. And now, with some of these diseases, they only exist in very, very, very small numbers, only in very few places in the world. So they have worked in eventually eliminating the disease itself. Is that not cure? Is that not treatment of the disease? Yes, it is. Is it not saving lives? If the purpose is to save the human life, then, and the only way to do that is by treating the human being before they're infected, well, you have no choice. It is now the cure. You might not have the condition yet, but we do know what happens once you get the condition, and we do know that there is no cure for it. Imagine tomorrow if a preventative treatment came out, there's no such thing. I'm just saying, hypothetically, if a preventative treatment came out for cancer, that if you do this treatment, you will never get cancer, 80% chance of you never getting cancer. And you see all around you, people are just dropping because of cancer. So many different forms of cancer. One person who lost their wife to cancer was saying, it seems to be the disease of choice nowadays. It's almost like everyone's choosing to die from cancer. There's so much cancer in the world at the moment. So, and there's no, once it reaches a certain stage, there's no treatment. And there's some types of cancer that in any phase, there's no real treatment to stop it. You can try to control it, but you can't make it go away. So, there is grounds for taking a vaccine as a preventative measure against a disease that you don't need much more evidence to prove how devastating it is. So if things like smallpox and polio were so dangerous, the virus that we're dealing with right now on a global level has probably done more damage than many of those combined. Now let's talk about the ingredients of this. As far as those that are derived from human cells or animal cells, that was the base of it. There isn't really anything left of it, of that substance by the time it's formulated into the dose that you're going to take, there's virtually nothing to speak of. In fact, doctors have said, medical researchers have said, you'll probably get that amount, every time you eat a fruit, you'll get some kind of animal DNA to that extent. So there isn't really an argument there. It's not even qaleel. It's not even a small amount. It's almost not there. And as far as the other elements are concerned, porcine and things like that, yes, it is a cause for concern. That's why we would not suggest a vaccine for diseases that can be cured through some other way. Flu vaccine, prime example. Flu season comes around, everyone's pushing it, take the flu vaccine, take the flu vaccine. You know what? For most people, the flu is not a life-threatening situation. And flu vaccines, therefore, that have those elements, that have those porcine elements, they should be avoided. Yes, if someone has a previous condition because of which having a flu could cause death, you know what? For that person, it would be okay. So there is an immense debate raging across the world in academic circles, in circles of ulama, and when it goes into the public, it takes a different shape altogether because people don't really know what they're talking about. Most of it is just hearsay. I heard so-and-so say this, I heard so-and-so say this. The other day I came across a Sikh person. He's like, yeah, there's a huge debate in India right now about the COVID vaccine. Some of your ulama are saying it's haram. And people are frightened, they don't know what to do. They don't want to displease God. They don't want to be sinful in their religion, but at the same time, they want to save their lives. So what should they do? It's not good for things like this to come out in front of non-Muslims and have them ask us these questions. But there are grounds for it. If somebody were to take it, they would not be considered sinful. The disease is very real. It is much more severe than any other pandemic that the history of the world has to show. In terms of its reach, in terms of the damage, in terms of the lives lost, and the lives that have been irreparably damaged. There are some people, they haven't died, but they will never be the same again. Their respiratory system is permanently damaged. Their lungs are permanently scarred. Other parts of their body, some of their internal organs are permanently damaged. So in such a case, people like myself would be supportive of people taking the vaccine and getting it out of the way. Just like in normal circumstances, many ulama would say that, praying salat like the way we pray with such gaps in between, especially remember when we were doing the 1.5 meter thing. Most ulama would say that, come on, this is not a Jamaat. It doesn't fulfill the conditions of Jamaat. That salat is not valid as a Jamaat. Hands down, everyone would say it. I would say it also. But when you have an option that either pray like this or don't pray together. What is the lesser evil? The lesser evil is at least bring people, let people come to the house of Allah and pray like this. It's better than closing the masajid down, which are from the sha'air of Allah. And jama'ah, salat with jama'ah is from the sha'air of Allah. It's better to uphold that to some extent rather than close it. Even now, do you think we're fulfilling the conditions of a jama'ah? Are our shoulders touching? Such strong warnings for praying without our shoulders touching. Are we praying with our shoulders touching? We're forbidden from praying like that. We are forbidden from touching our shoulders right now. So should we cancel all the jama'ah? Should we cancel salat with jama'ah? Should we close the masajid? No. Similarly, this is not an ideal situation, but it is a very real situation. The danger, the harm outweighs the benefits. There may be some benefit in not taking the vaccine, but the harms of not taking it by far outweigh. So the figures that we have, the figures that are coming to light right now, in light of the current rollout, yes, there will be some people that it's not suitable for. It will not work for everyone. And for some people, one vaccine will work. For some people, one vaccine will not work, another one will work. And for some people, it's not going to be that effective. No vaccine claims that you will be immune from the disease. This is not that type of vaccine. There is no such vaccine that will make you immune to COVID. But 79% of people will be saved from even the symptoms of COVID. You might have it, but you won't feel the symptoms. This is the latest figures that have been released today. 79% of people who are vaccinated will not feel the symptoms, and 21% of people will feel some symptoms. But almost 100% lives will be saved. So you will still get COVID, but your body will not suffer the way, and that's the nature of, there's two types of vaccines. There are some that make you immune to the thing completely, and then there are others that they make you immune to the symptoms. So I'm sure more discussions could be had, but it seems to be directly related to what we're talking about over here and in the context of medication. The Quran provides us guidance for every era, for every time, for every circumstance. This is not an antiquated book that it's a book of history, or it's a book that tells us how things were, how things used to be, how people used to practice. No. It is a very living text. It is very much alive, and it will continue to guide mankind until the Day of Judgment, and no other text has that power. No other divine revelation has that power, has that comprehensiveness, has that ability to continue to guide no matter what is happening in the world. May Allah Azza wa Jal give us the understanding of His book and give us the ability to practice on it. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa